It's 2 a.m. You have work in 6 hours, and your brain has decided this is the moment to think about immortality. Not living a long time, actually never dying. So you follow it because what else are you doing at 2 a.m.? The thing that ruins that fantasy isn't waiting for you in year 10,000. It shows up around year 40, and I'll get to why. What I landed on is stranger than the fantasy version and stranger than the horror version, which is not what I expected going in. Say some lab cracks it tomorrow. A pill, a gene therapy, doesn't matter which. Aging stops. Your cells quit wearing down. Whatever clock has been running since the day you were born just quietly switches off. You're biologically finished getting older, and you're now a permanent resident of this planet with no refund policy and no early checkout. We'll come back to that last part. The first reaction most people have is that this is obviously good, and that case deserves to be made properly, so let me make it. You stop watching the people you love get sick and fade out. You stop racing a clock. If you wanted to learn cello at 60 and talked yourself out of it because it seemed like a waste of whatever time was left, that math no longer applies. You have infinite Tuesdays now. Learn cello, learn 6 other instruments while you're at it. Every disease that rides on aging, heart disease, most cancers, Alzheimer's, the slow joint by joint betrayal your body starts staging after 50, stops being inevitable. Somewhere around 18% of global healthcare spending goes to age related conditions. Erase aging, and that number falls off a cliff. Trillions of dollars, and more to the point, an enormous amount of suffering that just doesn't happen. Then, the small petty upsides nobody mentions. Life insurance premiums stop existing, and so does most of that industry. You get to watch a tree you planted run its full life cycle instead of the first blurry decade of it. You also technically outlive the giant tortoise, which has held the title of suspiciously long lived animal for as long as anyone has been keeping score. Sorry, turtles. There's a quieter upside too. Real mastery takes decades, and then the person carrying all of it dies, and most of it goes with them. Picture a surgeon with 400 years of practice, or a physicist who has been circling the same unsolved problem since before your country existed. Knowledge would stack up instead of resetting every generation. Then think past your own life. Every project humans have historically had to hand to their grandchildren and hope it turned out okay, you'd get to see the end of. Reshaping a planet into something livable, undoing a couple of centuries of environmental damage, a 200-year coral reef restoration. You'd be there for the whole arc instead of reading about it in a history book you were never going to finish anyway. So far, so good. The uncomfortable part arrives sooner than the sci fi framing suggests, within about a decade rather than some distant century. Population math doesn't care how you feel about any of this. Birth and death rates currently balance each other into growth we can more or less handle. Remove death, or even just pause it, and half that equation is gone permanently. Nobody leaves. Every job, every apartment, every seat at every table stays occupied by someone with no biological reason to step aside. Think about your own job. Your boss's boss is immortal now. Not retiring at 65, not retiring at all. That corner office you were quietly counting on in 20 years is occupied forever by someone with 300 years of experience and no reason to move. You've entered the most competitive job market in human history, and it never resets. Your personal life gets stranger. Till death do us part was doing a lot of quiet work in those vows. It was an exit dressed up as romance. Take death out of it, and forever becomes literal and several centuries long. There's a crueler version of that problem, too. What if your partner can't afford it? Say the treatment costs more than a house, and you can pay, and they can't. You're not divorced. You just watch them age in real time while you don't, every day for the rest of a marriage that was supposed to end and instead keeps going long after their half of it stopped. That isn't a plot twist, it's a design flaw. Multiply it across your parents, your siblings, your friends, and immortality doesn't risk loneliness so much as hand it to anyone who can't bring their people along. Prisons break too. Life without parole currently means something like 40 or 50 years in practice. Under this version of forever, it means forever in the literal sense. Someone has to rewrite the whole concept of justice because a good chunk of the legal system quietly assumes people eventually die. And that assumption just got deleted. Then there's you. 300 years in, are you still the person who started this? Your cells are already being replaced constantly under normal biology. Stretch that across centuries, and you walk straight into an argument philosophers have been having for a very long time. The one about the wooden ship that has every plank swapped out one at a time until nothing original is left. Is it still the same ship? Now run that on your personality. Your memories blur past a certain point because human brains, immortal or not, were not built to hold 900 years of grocery lists and small talk. Try remembering what you had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. Now do it for the year 2340. And there's a question nobody wants to say out loud, which is whether anyone still has children. In a world with no death and finite resources, birth stops being a private choice and becomes policy. Somebody has to decide who gets to exist next. I don't have a comfortable way to move past that sentence, so I'll just leave it sitting there. The list of things that break the job market, the legal system, the dating pool, the retirement age, the population curve of an entire species, and your personal working definition of the word temporary. All of it reorganized around one switch. Now pull back, because underneath both the fantasy and the doom spiral, there's something weirder than either. Immortality is not invincibility. Everyone skips this. Stopping aging doesn't mean you can't die. A bus still works. So does drowning, a bullet, a virus your immune system has never met, or falling off a cliff at a party because you figured, hey, I am immortal now. How bad could it be? There are actual numbers on this. If accidents are the only remaining exit, the average immortal person still only makes it somewhere between 400 and 1,700 years, depending how you run the risk. Long but finite. Something gets you eventually. What we're really describing is extremely hard to kill, which is a less impressive product than it sounds. Every story we've told about living forever agrees on this, whether it's vampires and sunlight, or immortals who can only be killed by each other, or whatever version your own culture has about the man who wanted to live forever and regretted it. There's always a catch. Ours is just actuarial. There's a preview of this that already happened, incidentally. A Chinese emperor obsessed enough with living forever that he built a terracotta army for the afterlife as a backup plan, sent alchemists out for decades to find a potion of immortality. They came back with pills made from mercury, which is toxic to humans. He took them daily, convinced they were extending his life. They poisoned him slowly while he was actively trying to cheat death. People have been chasing this exact idea for over 2,000 years, and our best result so far is speeding up your own death while trying to avoid it. Humbling track record. There's a quieter earthquake underneath all of this, too, and it's religion. A lot of what religion has offered people historically is an answer to death, an afterlife, a reward, a reunion, a reason the ending isn't really the ending. Take death off the table for whoever can pay, and you've split humanity into two groups. One still living inside a belief system built around mortality, one that no longer needs it for that particular purpose. That's not a small cultural adjustment. That's rewriting one of the oldest structures our species has, and only for the people who can afford the upgrade. Which brings me to the part that worries me more than the population panic. This stops being a biology problem fairly quickly and turns into a pricing problem. Whoever can afford the treatment lives. Whoever can't, doesn't. Most medical breakthroughs eventually get cheap enough to reach everyone, but this one has a built in reason to stay expensive because the people who already have it never die off. And dying off is a big part of how prices and power structures normally make room. We've seen small previews of this with life saving drugs that stay out of reach for years, not because they're hard to manufacture, but because nothing forces the price down. Now run that same dynamic on death itself, with owners who never age out of power. The scale is uglier than it first sounds. Even if the treatment only ever reached the wealthiest sliver of the planet, that's tens of millions of people, locking in a permanent head, start with no expiration date on it. We wouldn't be inventing a new class of person. We'd be taking the people who already have the biggest advantage and removing the one thing that used to eventually catch up with them. If you want the genuinely bad version, don't picture a rich businessman. Picture a dictator. Every authoritarian government in history has come with one expiration date built in whether it wanted one or not, which is that the person in charge eventually dies. Remove that selectively for whoever already holds the power. And you haven't just built an economic upper class. You've built a political one with no scheduled ending, and nobody gets to wait him out. That first immortal class might never lose its grip. Once it forms, there's nothing left to break it up. No death to force a change, no natural drop in prices, no moment where the old leadership dies off and things shift a little. The usual resets stop happening. Every inequality in human history has had one brutal equalizer built into it, which is that everyone eventually dies and the board gets partly cleared. Take that away for the people who can pay, and you haven't built heaven. You've built a permanent ruling class with better skincare. When I started reading about this, I fully expected to land on the standard argument. Immortality is a bad idea. Endless boredom, meaning drains away. Everyone you love dies around you. The species goes stagnant. We've all heard that one. That's not where I ended up. The further in I got, the less immortality looked like the actual question. The question was always access. It isn't the nightmare people imagine, and it isn't the paradise either. It's death with a different gatekeeper, one that doesn't answer to biology anymore. It answers to ownership, to money, to whoever ends up controlling the technology. We wouldn't be eliminating mortality so much as privatizing it, which is somehow a stranger outcome than either of the two I went in expecting. The part that gives me some hope is the part almost nobody brings up. Unlike everything else about death, this version isn't handed down by nature. It's not a fixed rule none of us get a vote on. It's a decision, which means that for the first time in the history of our species, we actually get a say in how it gets built, who it reaches, how fair it is. Not afterward. So next time your brain wanders into one of those 2 a.m. conversations with itself about living forever, don't stop at who gets to. Ask who should. That answer, unlike the last 4 billion years of biology, is still ours to give.